you. Well, hello, everyone, and thanks for making it again to joining us on a Tuesday, a beautiful Tuesday, hopefully, where you are. And we are ready to kick off session number 2 with you and your students. It's good to see you. My name's Jim. I am here outside of Melbourne, Australia. I'm Wurundjeri land. I am an American who used to work in television, and we're talking about media literacy. So this is one of my favorite topics. I'm joined by my good friend, Mr. Ken Shelton, all the way from the US of A.
Sounds like you're starting a radio program.
I know. I can't help it. I can't help it. I just bring my microphone. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
No, it's,
yeah. How's everybody doing there?
It is good to see you. Some new faces, some faces that joined us last time. So really good. I know the last time we met, Ken, the students were very interested in knowing what my TikTok name was, and then I discovered it was actually quite simply just Deploy Learning. So I don't share anything. I don't have the courage to make videos quite yet, but if you are out there and you're on TikTok and you feel like you want to share that, drop that in the chat. We would love to give you a follow or a follow back or whatever it might be to help boost your TikTok numbers to get you to become an influencer one day. We're here to talk about a lot of things, but the first thing we want to chat about is the work that we did the last time. So I jumped over here to our Google Classroom. I tell you what I'll do. I will, if you're new with us, I'm just going to go grab the invitation code and drop that into the chat. If you haven't joined the Google Classroom, you'll need to join this classroom with your Gmail account. And you'll see it'll take you to all the resources, the things that we've put together for this course. Everything from the printable student workbook to just definitions and media terms that we often use during this course, but also ones that you should just know. And then also here are these activities that as teachers, you could use those with your students, or as students, you can use them to just increase your knowledge around media literacy so that you too become more media savvy. We'll be talking about a few of these things like today, like the community reading. We will also talk about just learning to be a responsible media consumer, and maybe a few other things in here. We'll always talk about misinformation and disinformation. So all those things are in there. So if you haven't had a chance to go in and take a look at these resources, we welcome you to do that. If you were here last week or you weren't here last week, here under session 1 in the Google Classroom is the recording from the whole recording, which is here. And then Ken and I just made these tiny little videos. It's just little highlight videos that you can play on your phone around one about like spotting ads in social media, and then another one just really on that topic of misinformation and disinformation. We also have the Jamboard that we used, and then also the session slides, the slides that we use to showcase some of the things that are out there. So here under session 1 from 2 weeks ago, you'll find all the recordings. So you can go back and watch those as you like. And then what we'd asked you to do over the last 2 weeks is work on this project. So the session 1 project, it was a simple project to ask you. Simple, I mean, there's not very complicated project for you to share social media accounts that represent your community, maybe you, accurately and well. And what we found here is we found a great one in here from I forgot the name of the team. Here we go. Here it's in here. Here we go. Thank you. And then. Team Wow, and shared a number of great resources in here. And what Ken and I have done is we've put together, we've collected those resources and then added them into a Google Doc. So I'll drop the Google Doc in here somebody just put links to socials that might represent you. We're always interested in more. And I'm just going to drop that link here. Here's a Google Doc that you could use to take a look. And so let me share with you what that looks like. Give me one moment to put that up on the screen. Here we go. And so here's Team Wow in here. I've added those here. If you're interested in getting into that, hopefully it's shared correctly. Let me just double check that it's shared correctly. It looks like it is. That's right. And Team Wow, thank you for, if you're here, thank you for sharing Becky's World. So Team Wowan had mentioned that over 98% of the folks in Papua New Guinea use Facebook. And so they thought it would be a good idea to share some Facebook links that they felt represented their community. And I had a great look over all of these. And the two that really stood out for me was Becky's World. Just such a beautiful first-person account of perhaps what it's like to live there from potentially one person's point of view. And then also I found that the PNG Education News was really interesting to me as a teacher, how that represents the folks there. So if you live in Australia, these are some great resources for you to take a look at and follow. If you're there in Papua New Guinea, then perhaps if you're not following them, it would be also a good idea to take a look at. And then I just went ahead and shared some about me. So here's some about some social media accounts that I really enjoy. I'm an American that lives in Australia, so I like to be surrounded by folks who are like me, and that's just a lot of conversations about from Americans about living in Australia. So I love this account, and then also people share lots of recipes for food that we can't get in Australia that we love in America. So of course, I've added a few of these. I've added the news example, like where I get my news. One of these accounts that I really feel like represents my thinking is NPR. That's called National Public Radio. It's out of the US, and it's just one of their social media accounts. I'm often on Instagram, so I appreciate their Instagram channel. I'm a big history buff. I love history. I love especially New York history. So I've added a couple examples in here, but there's another history account that really talks about history in America, and it's a great account just to follow. And then I also put in some opportunities for my learning. So there's lots of groups I'm not part of. For example, the Australian Indigenous folks here have an account. It just helps me to try to understand more. There's also a great one in here called Decolonize Myself. There's from Black educators in America, and then even some folks who are non-binary. So they represent a non-binary voice that I don't have, that I really find very valuable and important. So anyways, I just thought I'd share that link here for you. And if you wanted to take a look at what these links represent me, and that's kind of what we were looking for from you. Ken, do you want to speak to some of the ones you have here?
Yeah, I just put it in the chat too. I just shared a few. I mean, I can add more, but I'll end up filling up the page. But you all can see, I mean, mine are either programming or websites, but it is, yeah, the stuff I go to.
That's right.
Well, I guess let me kind of put it this way. So, for example, the Zen Education Project, it is a project that was started in the spirit of a gentleman by the name of Howard Zinn, who wrote a book called A People's History of the United States. And it's the kind of history that we need to be learning here and in our schools, but it is not taught in our schools. So that is where I go for learning, but technically it's also history. So that's part of the reason why I was like, well, I put a few things there, but there's kind of a crossover. Like even the Equal Justice Initiative, it's a little bit of both learning, plus it's also history, and it's also news. And again, obviously those things are all that I have. They're all going to be U.S. centric for obvious reasons, but they are also from more of a Black American perspective of the U.S., as well as, like I said, the Zen Education Project. I'll just share with you all because it kind of fits in with the reason why we're here together. One of the things that I do around being able to tell if an educator has, and in fact, Jim, if you look at Jim's link that says Decolonize Myself, by reading Howard Zinn's book, that technically is someone decolonizing themselves, because it's exposing you to narratives and historical facts that, again, are not, you won't find them in the curriculum. So, for me, I'm always looking at ways in which I can broaden my viewpoint and my understanding that is unfiltered, so that I can formulate my own perspective, my own opinions, and quite frankly, my own ways of evaluating information, which coincidentally is aligned with what we're doing here, which we're doing it with a focus on media, but it's still that same learning process that, just give it to me and let me go ahead and work through my own thinking routine to determine, the reliability, the credibility, and the validity of what I'm consuming.
That's such a good point, Ken. So all of these things that we're sharing, all of these links need to be looked at from the lens that you're developing around media literacy. So don't take what we share here, or don't take what anybody shares here as fact or as proof. But it's good to be able to take a look at it and then form your own opinions about it, which is really what I'm doing in this section about learning. These are a lot of things I don't know anything about. And it's just been really good from my perspective, and also for me to have a different point of view, especially point of views of my friends or folks that I work with. And so hopefully, if you have an opportunity to share your resources, we'd welcome that. You can do that by going into Google Classroom and clicking on this classwork, coming down here to project number 1, and just opening up this document and just adding some social media accounts in there. And that will immediately, you'll see a little button that says turn it in. And once you turn it in, we'll have access to that, and we'll put that list together. We'll share this document that we're sharing here today. We'll put that into the Google Classroom as well. So you can have access to this when you click on session number 2. Okay. Really great. So thank you for the folks that worked on this already, and we always appreciate you sharing social media accounts, news accounts that you think represent you or your community very well. That's really the idea. We want you to look at these accounts and see, is this a good example of who I am? Because it would be great for us to help to try to understand. You won't be able to edit this document. You'll just be able to go into Google Classroom and turn in the assignment that's here. Or feel free to create your own document and share it into the chat, and the link to that document in the chat. All right. If you have any questions about that, just reach out to us. We're happy to help you through that. That's no problem. But if you've already done the work, let us know, and we'll be happy to take it from you in some way so we can put it in here. All right. Really good. We really appreciate that. Let me just bump through. So the question that we kick off today is where do you get your news? So where do you receive news? So we call this how we receive news. We call it a modality. Just a modality. It's just a big fancy term for just a particular mode in which something is experienced, right? So we can receive our news in so many different ways. And so I wanted to start off with a form, a Google form that you could fill out and to tell us where you get your news from. So I'm just going to drop that link. So I'm just going to type it in here, fill this out. So take a second to click on this link that I just put into the chat. And we're looking for you to think about the news sources that you're using and how do you receive the news. So I'll just share, I'll put that link up on the screen. So just come in here. What news source out of the news sources that you use, which ones are the most believable? Which ones are the most believable? So here's how you see, these are the different modalities that we receive our news from. And then, and what we're looking for you to do is pick one. Yes, only one. And then tell us why you think it's the most believable news source. Does that make sense? So the link is in the chat. Go ahead and click on that link and type in. It's anonymous, so you won't see it. So you can see up here my email address. It says not shared. So it's anonymous. So no one will know that it was you who wrote it. But we're looking for you to pick the most believable news source. Which of these news sources or modalities do you think is the most believable? It's a loaded question, isn't it, Ken? It's not a loaded question. It is. I'm interested to see what everybody thinks about what is the most believable news source. So maybe have that conversation there in your room with the students or the folks that are in your room. You might have to pick one or just fill out that form a couple times or a few times. What is the most believable news source to you? I clicked TikTok by accidentally. I'm not sure well, I'm not going to try to influence your thinking. Just going to leave it. I put a little spot here if there's one I didn't put up there. Yeah, news app or a website or radio. What's the most believable? If you grew up in the 1930s, probably radio, right? Does that still exist? Do we still get our news from the radio? All right. Jody does good. Yeah, there's talkback radio, right? There's lots of news in talkback radio here in Australia. Call-in radio stations. ABC, the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Channel.
Corporation.
Corporation, thank you. Cooperation or corporation?
Harrison has a question.
Oh, yeah. Please ask. Harrison, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Harrison, feel free to put that your question in the chat, or you can go ahead and unmute while we're filling out that form.
Hello, Jim.
Hello. Can you hear me? We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I was just trying to respond to the news source that is more reliable.
Yes.
From my end, I'd go for radio.
Yeah, really? Why? Why, Harrison? Why would you pick radio?
Why I prefer radio because many a times from the location where I am in, TV news sometimes the reports are done, the incident or the news that is broadcasted is a day or maybe even 2 or 3 days after we hear about the story, and then it comes on. And other social media applications, this time around, I have a lot of people who are posting fake information, so I don't believe that very much. But with the radio, you hear about some happenings, and then after an hour or two, it's broadcasted over the radio through news times and all this. So I prefer radio than the other source. Thank you.
Yes, that's really an interesting perspective. Thanks for sharing that, Harrison. It's I think I'm hearing you say that the radio is probably the most up to date and accurate out of all of them, right? A lot of those, just like a lot of our social media channels are not accurate, right? They come with either they're flat out mis or disinformation, but a lot of it is misinformation, isn't it? Different people thinking or responding to what they think is the news. Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that, Harrison. Well, if you have an opportunity, for the rest of you, feel free to drop it in the chat. I see some people. Betty is saying that I think it's not Betty, but it's but the team Betty there is sharing about they have a news or a website. Let's take a look at the responses in this form. So let's I'm just going to click this button over and then jump into here. Let's see here. See if I can bump this up a little bit. make it larger, but it doesn't seem to want to cooperate. It looks like 44% of the folks responding say it's they're getting their most believable news from television, radio as well. So representing Harrison as radio, and then a couple of you have said the news or website or newspaper. Yeah, interesting. Nobody said TikTok. Nobody said Instagram. What a surprise. No, it's I actually I feel like I get a lot of my news from news sources that I follow on social media. But I tend to listen to recordings of things. So I tend to go and tell my my devices to play me, you know, the news from NPR, for example. And it's very interesting. So Kathy, you're struggling with that link. Let me share with you the link to use. I think it's back up here. Let me just click on this really quickly. Yeah. So Kathy, if you feel like you want to try to access it, here's the link again for the form to click to give us your responses. Yeah, really interesting. I guess I didn't realize that radio would be the most accurate representation of our news, especially for some of you who are yeah, it's just interesting. Really good. All right, and then choosing your website because it's much more convenient in terms of accessing. Yeah, I think for me, news on demand is very interesting, isn't it? The idea of going into and getting my news when I want it, and that I do with the internet. All right, good. Well, when we talk about these modalities, when we talk about the types of news sources that we have out there, there are different, we call these mechanisms of consumption, and how we get our news. How we get our news influences maybe the believability of those things. And so I just wanted to go through some of the ones that we just had on this list. Like, for example, the newspaper. When I was a kid, the newspaper, I used to deliver the newspaper and then to all the houses in my neighborhood. And then every day we had the newspaper come to our door. And if it wasn't coming to our door, you could get it from a box that's on the street or just at your local shops. So the newspaper was quite a big deal for us, right? It was the news. In my opinion, it was everything. You know, I'm much older than some of you, but I always found that the newspaper was the source of news. What's interesting about that now is when we look at the newspaper, we have to consider which newspaper are we reading? Do you have more than one newspaper? Raise your hand if you have more than one newspaper where you live. Is there more than one? Yeah, there's a few of you. Yeah, which newspaper is the best newspaper? So we have to sort of look at that, and then the hard thing to do would be to go and figure out who owns that newspaper. You know, that is so the owner, you know, the company or the people that own that newspaper, you know, who are they to make that paper? So we have, like where I live in a small town outside of Melbourne. We have a local newspaper, you know, and it's written by the folks that I see in the shops, in the bakery. And then there's the newspaper you get from the cities or even from Sydney or something like that. All of those different news sources make a difference. Whereas when I was a kid, that we just had one newspaper and it came from that city. And I just believed it without thinking about it. So I think as the more and more access to news, we have to consider who owns that newspaper and where does it come from. Yeah, Ken is adding here, does the owner potentially influence which news that they're going to show? Which news? So sometimes they don't tell you all the news. Television, we saw that in our survey. Television is a big one. Television is, you know, in my household, we had television. We had one television when I was growing up, and that television always came on after dinner, and that television always played the news. You know, my parents were the ones who turned it on, and they're the ones who told it was the news. And so what came on television was the truth, right? So, but we just talked. I think last time we talked, Ken, you brought up the fact that there were so many different television stations in America, and so many different news stations. And so where is that news coming from? Which news station? Is there any bias? I tend to watch CNN a lot. CNN, I don't know what it stands for, Cable Network News or something like that. CNN is an international news agency that's based in America. It is very biased. It tends to be biased towards the way I think. But when I watch CNN, I have to always look at it and think to myself, is this true? Is this really the news? Or is it just the reporter or the television station's point of view? Okay. So I don't know. I don't know. I think we had a question from one of the students last week, just around why do you have so many TV stations? What if you just have one? Right. So be thinking about that. Right. So television can be a good source of information for us and can be believable, but we also, just like the more news we get from television, the more we have to be careful about what they're saying. I just recently did a project on some news that was shared by Fox Television. Flat out disinformation, complete disinformation. And I did a report about it just to kind of showcase how it was proven that it was disinformation. You can remember last time we talked, disinformation is information that when you share it, you're trying to trick somebody, right? You're trying to trick you. You're not just sharing news that's false by accident. That's misinformation. Hopefully you remember that from last week, that conversation. And there's a little video in there in your Google Classroom to watch if you need to remember that. We'll talk about mobile devices, right? So we get a lot of our news from the internet. With the internet that's on our phones. And so that's either a notification from an app, that's a notification or text message that comes from maybe from the city. When I live out in the bush here in Melbourne, and often I get notifications that there is a fire near my house. So the city will notify me that there's a fire in my house. Do I believe that? I do believe it. I don't even want to think about it twice when I get a notification from the city that there's a fire near my house. I want to leave right away. So I tend to believe that notification that comes from the city. And so mobile devices, what other kind of notifications do you get from mobile devices sharing the news? There could be an app, but it potentially is you maybe signed up for a notification to get a notification in your email, something like that. Is anybody subscribing to any news services that send you notifications on your phone? Yeah, Jody's saying the weather. That's great. Yeah, you get you either get notifications or you can look and see use your phone to access the weather. Yeah, good. All right. Then the next one I'll share with you is your application's feed, right? The idea that, like me, I get a lot of my news from Instagram, or I get a lot of my news from social media as I scroll through. So all of these different apps, I might see an app from CNN or a post from CNN, or I might see a post from somebody that tends to report on the news. Those are probably, for me, they're not as believable. Right? Often, anytime I get a notification or it's in my application's feed, like my Facebook feed or my Instagram feed, I have to double check it. I have to constantly double check those things, and it takes a lot of extra work to verify. Does that make sense? The idea of having to verify news that comes in my Instagram feed or my TikTok feed takes a lot more work. All right. And then the last thing I'll share with you is artificial intelligence. Now we find that as you use your phone, and you are searching and clicking and going and looking at things, your phone starts to share with you things that you like. So that's just what I mean by that heart in this picture. And so Ken is asking in the chat, which I think could probably stand to get a response from you. Is that artificial intelligence, AI, is that artificial intelligence a good thing? Or for you, it's sending you information or showing you more information about things you like? Or are you is it a bad thing or potentially a bad thing? All right. Yeah, feel free to respond in the chat. Feel free to unmute. Or is that artificial intelligence good, or is it potentially bad? Yeah, that's right. Some great examples in here. Great. Thank you for adding to the chat. Yeah. Is it? Ken, I think, has a lot to share about artificial intelligence. Yeah. You know, Ken, I don't know how you feel about this. When I will purposely not click on something. I will purposely not click on something because I don't want my phone to think I like it. Even if I'm interested in it, I won't click on it because I don't want my phone I don't want the robot to think that I like it. Like anytime Kim Kardashian comes up in my news, I might be a little bit interested, but I never click it because I do not want them to think that I like anything that has to do with the Kardashians. And then I will purposely click on something that I think I want to know more about. I'll just click on it and close it because I want my phone to think that. Does anybody do that? Does anybody try to trick the robot, the artificial intelligence? Nicole says yes. Mm. Ken, can you explain a little bit about that? What do you mean by that? The artificial intelligence is designed to feed into our confirmation bias.
Yeah. So perfect. Thank you. So I first of all, thank you all for putting your answers in the chat. I think this is good. This is the kind of cognitive exchange that we should be having with this, and we've been able to do it each time we've met. I'm glad that a lot of you put it's good, it's bad, it can be both, it's mixed. As of right now, so I'll share with you how I feel about it. As of the way artificial intelligence is currently designed and used, from my perspective, it's very bad. So I'll share with you all two things: artificial intelligence, confirmation bias. So one, think about what artificial intelligence is designed to do. It's designed to artificially replicate intelligence, the way we think. In order to get to that point, you have to have an algorithm. The algorithm needs a whole lot of historical data in order for it to start working. And then as you use your devices, it continues to learn, and it will look for the algorithm is designed to repeat things that you tend to prefer. So like Jim just shared, if I read a news story and I like it, and then I read a similar news story and I like it, or I go to the same source and I like it, it's going to keep giving me that same thing. That goes into the whole idea around what's called the consumer economy, which means our devices, they want us on them and they want us using them. The confirmation bias is that you keep going back to something that continues to confirm what you're thinking, which means your perspective starts to do this. So like Mark said, it can lead to what I'm saying. Yes. And the only way to understand how it works and how to force it not to do that is, like, for example, what Jim shared. So that's why for me, when I go on Instagram, I go on TikTok. TikTok's algorithm is a little bit different, but when I go on Instagram or I go on Twitter, I make sure that I interact with a variety of accounts so that it can't predict. I'll share with you all, for example, A lot of educators that I know, when I ask them, go and look at your social media feed, and I want you to tell me the demographic representation of the last 20 accounts that you interacted with. Does it represent diversity of perspective? Does it represent diversity of experience? Does it represent diversity of representations? Like, what do the people look like? Does it represent diversity of thinking? And then, of course, when they do that, they realize, oh, so that ties in with us with media literacy, is the fact that that's the way those things are designed. And for us, if you know that, then now you can intentionally make it to where it doesn't constantly confirm a bias that you have or feed you information that creates the word I like to use is myopia. It doesn't take what you can see with everything and turn it into only seeing what it knows it wants you to see, or what you want to see.
Woo, Ken. Exactly right. I think once we know that what you're talking about, once we at least have a basic understanding of what you're saying, a lot of us haven't had the time to dig into it like you have, Ken. But if we have a basic understanding of this, then we know that the news that our apps and our phones are sending to us, that as if it's important, may not be as important as it pretends to be. Does that make sense? So we have to be very careful about that. We have to maybe follow folks that are in our social media feeds or in our accounts that are maybe not what you would normally look for. Does that make sense? Is that what we would need to do, Ken? Do you have any advice on how we could maybe get past it or trick the artificial intelligence?
Well, like several it looks like the students mentioned around misuse. It's to just ask yourself, am I constantly getting information that's confirming what I'm thinking? How do I either get a feed that's going to give me a different perspective or interact with a feed that's going to give me a different perspective? It is not easy to do that, but that's the beauty of all of us being together like this right now. Is the first step towards doing that is the awareness that is doing that to you in the first place. Mm-hmm. That's why I always share, there's only two industries that refer to their primary customer base as users.
As opposed to customers. Right. That's interesting. Yeah. I can think of one. What's the other one?
What's the one? Well, I would love for the teachers and students to share in the chat. What do you think the two industries are?
That refer to their customers as users.
Refer to their customers as users.
Yeah. There's a lot in there.
Tech companies is one. Yep. So you all listed Meta and Facebook. Those are examples of tech companies, all tech companies. I would include social media and telecommunications under that as well, but mostly social media and tech companies, and one other one. Should I put it in the chat?
Yeah. Take us off our suspense.
There we go.
And that's all we have for today. Have a great day, everyone. That's your biggest takeaway of the year, right? That's a big one.
Now here's the thing. I know it's
bro.
Yeah, Oxon, too late. Yeah. It's tech companies and drugs. They're primary customer base users. But here's the thing. In all seriousness, the tech companies recognize that the way our brains work, we want to feel good. We want to be told what we're thinking is correct. We don't want to be wrong. We want to be affirmed in who we are. We want to be affirmed in what we think. That's all that feel good thing. A lot of folks, for whatever reasons, which I don't vilify those that are battling a drug addiction, because it's a mental health and a public health challenge, not so much an individual thing. But aside from that, the whole idea is, if you think about anything that is addictive, it's, you go to it because it gives you something. It gives you something that is affirming and you feel good about it. That's the same thing that the tech companies are looking at in the use of our devices. And that's precisely why what we're doing in these workshops is very important, because the whole idea is to develop an awareness to say, I know that you want me to continue to go and use your platform, and you're going to try to get me to continue to use it and be glued to my phone all day by feeding me something that's going to reinforce what I'm already thinking. So when you know that, you trick the algorithm to not constantly do that, so that way you're getting more information, and it doesn't lead to, as I shared, a perspective that's like this that turns into this.
It's a really great point, Ken. It's a really great point. And I think these phones can be very addictive, right? This social media stuff can be very addictive. And because of that artificial intelligence, it feeds our addiction. You know, and it lets us, it makes us realize it it makes us we should be aware that artificial intelligence wants us to keep looking and keep clicking. It does not want us to go away. Just like a commercial, just like an advertisement in your newspaper, all those things are out there. One of the things that we want to take away from this. Actually, I think I have one more question. What other mechanisms out there? So, we know that the internet, we know the television, we know our newspapers. Is there another way that we're getting our news? I think radio. We heard radio. I should have added radio in here. Is there any other way that we're getting? Yeah, look at word of mouth. That's a great one. That's you're so close to being read at the same time. Word of mouth, great one. The idea of conversations that we have in our common areas, at school or in the in cafeterias or wherever it might be, out on the block, wherever you are. It's word of mouth. We do often listen to our friends, and when one friend does say that, we're like, like that. We all have that one friend that shares a story. We go, maybe that's true or not true. We know that person. Whereas another person comes around, that comes around, you're always waiting for the latest news from that person, because they always seem to have it all. They seem to know everything. Yeah, it's good. What else? Word of mouth. Anything else? I don't know who Mr. Beast, but yeah, potentially. The tea leaves. Yeah. Somebody in your life, from stories, from books. Good. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, our textbooks sometimes, right? We get our news, especially our history from our textbooks. Yeah, good. Really great. When we look at these, when we have these community sharing, we call that the community reading experience. The community reading experience, there is a think about it in your Google Classroom right here, called the community reading experience. It just kind of helps talk about the idea that the more likes, the more comments, or the more shares a post or an online comment receives from people that the more likes it gets from people that the more trustworthy you think it is. And the same thing exists for the more dislikes or negative comments a post gets from people that you trust, then you tend to distrust that content. And I think that we call that the community reading experience. And that may not always be true, right? So when we see, for example, Ken, I trust Ken. He's a good friend of mine. When I see Ken liking something online, I trust Ken. So I think it has to be somewhat true, and it's but we should always be thinking about that. We should always be thinking, What is happening here? Why do my friends like it? And should I also like it? And the same thing exists for if my friends don't like it, should I also not like it? That community reading experience, it can be very powerful. It can be very powerful, very influential in how you think or what you think is true or not true, trustworthy or not trustworthy. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, that's a community reading experience. It's a powerful, powerful influencer, which is ultimately does lead to the idea of like, that's why we always like this one account, and then next thing you know, they run a commercial. We're like, oh, I should buy that because you trust that person. You trust it. You trust what they say. So then you think that you should do that. Yeah. As educators, we need to teach our students to stop and think for themselves. Jody, that's a good point. And the question I would have is, do we leave opportunity in our classrooms for that to happen? Do we create opportunities for our students to question and think about that? So something just to be thinking about when it comes to that. All right, Ken, you ready for me to turn it over to you? Just to chat about some of the evaluating media.
Yes, I am ready. I just got a couple of slides queued up here that I figured I'll just use them from this. So first of all, thank you all for your contributions in the chat. And I want you all to, I'm going to share with you all a couple of things. So one is, remember, we just went through with Jim all the different ways that we consume information. And I use the word information rather than news because in some cases, like one of you mentioned, the weather, depending upon where you are, the weather isn't newsworthy. So for example, where I live, the weather really isn't newsworthy because it's always sunny and mild. That's it. However, with that being said, there's a couple of things to connect to our dialogue about social media, what Jim talked about around where we consume things, and then also the community reading experience. So I'm going to drop these in the chat now. There we go. So remember, part of the way we can counter artificial intelligence and confirmation bias is awareness. And so part of that awareness, and one of the strategies for us to do, is to literally ask those questions. And I'm going to share with you all a website which we shared with the teachers a while ago on how you can start to not only develop the awareness, but you'll be able to ask yourself those questions: what is real, what is fake, what is confirmable, what is reliable, in seconds. For now, you take your time doing it, but eventually you can look at it like many of you did with, I can't remember which of the images it was. It was either the one, I know for sure many of you did with the snowboarder and the bear, and you were like, well, wait a minute, something doesn't look right with that. And I still can't help but laugh. If you watch that YouTube video again and you see her putting her headphones on and getting set up, the bear's just standing there in the back. So with that being said, it's important to recognize the following things. Stand by here. The way these things are set up, like we just did, is to do what's called the trigger effect. So I'm going to show you all. Okay, so these are a couple of questions to consider when it comes to your consumption of information, your curation of information, and then, like Jim just shared, the community reading experience, which is that community reading experience, that is essentially, I read something and I'm going to send it to all my friends. You don't bother taking the time to confirm, is it true? Is it, or is it not? Is it fake? Is it reliable? Is it accurate? Any of those things. So the questions to ask yourself around the information before you even get to real, fake, confirmable, or reliable is, how does that information make you feel? How might it make others feel? I don't know. Have you all noticed, and feel free to put in the chat, have you all ever seen something pop up in your social media, hear something on the news, on the radio, see something on TV, and your immediate reaction is emotional? Oh my God, I got to tell somebody. Something along those lines. Has that ever happened to any of you? Suha said yes, on a daily basis. Suha, you sure you don't live in the United States? Because it happens here every day, especially with the garbage that's going on right now. So, yes. So, first of all, if someone tells you no, that doesn't happen, then they're not being truthful. Yes, it happens to all of us. The question is, do you immediately share it? Or do you wait and say, you know what, I've got an emotional response. Let me see if this is the truth or not. And that goes into the whole thing around things like, even if the information does not trigger me, are there elements of it that might be triggering for others? Now, part of what influences our emotional response to media is what's called the access lens, which is, where are you consuming your media from? So you have, many of you have shared, I want to say you shared in fact, let me pause for a second because Suhas put it in the chat. News will always trigger someone though. Good point. Is that intentional? When you say news will always trigger someone, is the news doing that on purpose? Jody says sometimes. I would argue it depends on the source. And I actually want you all to see one other thing that I have here. So here's an example of something that happened with the community reading experience. What was put on the Facebook post was, Georgia officers kill over 250 people. And if you look at the comment, hopefully you all can see, look at the comments on the right. This is huge. Why isn't the mainstream media covering this? These 2 officers in Georgia have killed over 2 people in the line of duty. Anybody notice anything about that photo? People thought it was for real. That was their emotional response, and they immediately shared it when they didn't know that that was a promo for The Walking Dead. So do you see how, look, Suhas, I was going to say exactly. So do you see how that's where you look at what is the emotional response? And by the way, let me confirm that this is real and reliable first before I start sharing it, because that's how things. Remember, that's what happened with the Woolshed company. They wanted to test it with videos to see what makes a video go viral. Getting an emotional response is one of the number one. It's not number one, but it's one of the highest responses to a headline or something that is going to be emotional, that's going to trigger it going viral. The other thing, again, is how are we accessing our information? Is it on the cell phone? Is it on a tablet? Is it on a laptop? On a desktop? On the radio? On the television? Do you all know that news articles appear very differently depending upon the device that you consume them from? So my question for all of you is, you're looking at the exact same article on CNN's website back, this was back in May. What do you see? What do you think? And what do you wonder about the difference between those two?
I remember when I saw this, Ken, I saw the one on the left first, and I was almost concerned.
So Jody, they're both CNN. It's literally, but it's interesting you put that. Jody noticed something, which I don't think is intentional, but it is influenced by the device. It literally is the exact same article, but if you'll notice, to Jody's point, consuming from a laptop, you see it's from CNN Health. Consuming from a mobile device, it just says CNN. What's the likelihood that somebody might associate the left with real news and the right versus, oh, that's only for people that are interested in fitness? even though it's the exact same article. Do you notice on the right, you can see all the other things that they're going to recommend that you consume. You won't see that on the left. The other thing is it gets into the whole idea around lateral reading and reading upstream. The fact that on your computer, you're able to see most of the article, whereas on your phone, you've got to scroll. Which one are you more likely to read the entire article? One where you can see almost the whole thing on one screen, or one where you got to sit there scrolling? So this is what you're looking at here again. That was a real article published by CNN about your walking speed and that it could indicate dementia. Okay, that was a real article on the website and on a phone. But the question is the following for you all. Because that goes into what we're going to talk about briefly next, is when you consume, curate, analyze, and evaluate information, first of all, how does the device affect your ability to locate what I call traditional markers of credibility, such as the author, the date of the publication, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll go back to it. If you'll notice, one, it's more clear than the other, although you can see the author, the date, and things like that. But, and I don't have it in these slides, but I do have examples of where basically what's going on is to optimize for the phone, they have to remove some of what's called the tables in order for it to fit on the phone. And now, as far as who gets to determine what gets removed and what doesn't, well, that's the web designer. But that's why it's important to ask yourself, how do I locate, again, traditional markers of credibility? The author, the date of publication. If it's a news article or it's an article that says, talks about research, do they cite the source? Do they tell you where the data came from? And then continuing on, especially if you think about the emotional response, how does the community reading experience affect your urge to trust or share information? Jim just shared, if I read an article and I don't bother to evaluate it for the quality, the credibility, and the reliability of the source, but I say, dude, you got to read this. Jim's likely to read it because he's going to trust me. And if it triggers his response, he's then going to share it. Next thing you know, something has been shared and even gone viral, and no one's bothered to say, well, wait a minute, is this even real? And that's why I have the last question. Is the way I'm using my device affecting how I interact with or respond to information? Because ultimately, if you think about that for all of you, how often do you all read something on Facebook, TikTok, or Instagram? You save it, you bookmark it or save it because you want to be able to go back to it later as well. So there's a method that was very popular when Jim and I love it, Jody, quite often though I forget to go back to it. Yeah, that happens because they constantly throw in new stuff at us anyway. So Jim and I, we were exposed to an acronym, actually it's an initialism, called this when it came to evaluating information. And it's called the CRAP method. And I'm going to send you all what the CRAP method is. And yes, have we taken into consideration people with sight problems? Well, that's when you get into the accessibility part of images to text or alt text. There's your CRAP method to reevaluate information: currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. Except there's a problem with that to share with you all. That's what Jim and I were essentially taught when we were in high school. There was no internet back then. So my question to you all is, would the CRAP method be something that is useful now? Jody said me too. Jody's admitting her age. So my question to you all is that CRAP method. Currency, relevancy, authority, accuracy, and purpose. Is that a method for evaluating information that would be reliable if you know that that method was taught when we were in high school and even in college in the 80s and the 90s? Okay, Abel says yes. Anybody else? All right, so Jody says definitely. Mary says yes. Pauline says yes. Jackson says yes. I actually, and we won't have enough time to talk about it further. I actually say no. I'm real curious as to why you all say yes, and I'll share with you why I say no. I say no because that method was developed before you had digital technologies and you had information that was constantly appearing before you right away. And so keep in mind, remember, of the process, currency is the first one. Well, I can come up with something that's current right now, and I can come up with something that's current in 30 seconds from now. So how relevant is that going to be when currency is no longer a factor? And then, of course, that again, that's the relevancy. And then the authority. Well, who gets to determine what's an authority and what isn't? Remember, anybody can make a website and anybody can post on social media. And then, of course, it's very hard sometimes to figure out the accuracy. And then remember, going back to what we talked about before, what is their purpose? Is their purpose to share information, or is it misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation? So I'm going to leave you all with something that we share with the teachers early on. And that is an internet game. I like games. Y'all like games? I like playing games. This is a game. It's called Speed or Break. So the whole idea is that emotional response. When you see a headline on here, do you break and then look at things more carefully, or do you speed on because you can determine whether it's real or whether it's fake? Not for me to determine, but it's a game to be able to be played. That, unfortunately, Jim, because I'm looking at the clock, I think, unfortunately, that has to be it. But Cedric put in the chat confused. Cedric, are you confused with what I explained? Or are you saying that something is confusing as far as being able to evaluate information? Did not hear the question properly. I asked a lot of questions. Which one? Help me out, Jim. Which question?
Perhaps I think Cedric may have just been confused about the follow-up question. Perhaps just for the sake of time, because we really only have a few more minutes left, I do want to share with you just a reminder that a lot of the things we're covering are already in the Google Classroom under Think About It. So we have a lot of these great things, great resources for you to look at in your classroom under they're called Think About It. And so they're really just exercises with a little bit more information for you to take your time, maybe print them out, and then use in your own classrooms to have discussions around. What we're going to be doing from now is looking at the final project that we have set for you. So we won't be back until we won't be back face to face like this, and for I think the 6th of September. So we have about 3 weeks off from this course to work on a project. So we're looking for you to do that individually. You can do that as a group, as a team. What we want you to do is look at any of the resources that we've shared, the conversations that we've had in this course, the examples we've shared, or even things that are happening in your own life right now. And we want you to create a project around that. And so I'll just go ahead and pull it up on the screen where you can find your final project. The final project that we'll be asking you to do is also in the student workbook. So if you have your student workbook handy, if you've printed that out, you'll be able to see that as in there as well. So I'm just sharing my screen here just to talk about what we're looking for in your final project. So you'll come here, that's the first project, here's your final project. And the final project is really about you creating something that is useful to the folks in your life or in your classroom, other students at school. And we want you to create, I'm using the word campaign. Really, it's an artifact or an advertisement or a video of some sort to help people discover the truth in media. So how can we help our colleagues or our friends at school be better at consuming media? So the project is to create a campaign about discovering truth in media. Using what we've learned in this course, it's time to show your peers how to safely use the internet. So we are asking you to make a video, create artwork, take a photo, maybe even do like an audio recording where you're interviewing a teacher or something that is going to help your students be better at using the internet or discovering the truth in the media that we have access to or that we consume. So we're looking for you to be able to share some ideas around that maybe a topic that you've liked. So if you have it, if you're thinking about it already, like what in this course so far has stood out to you? What's one thing that you think, oh, I would love to just tell this to my friends, or I would love to tell this to teach more of this? Is there anything that's standing out above other ones? What topics do you think would be something that you're interested in maybe developing or creating something around? Is it misinformation, disinformation? Is it reading upstream? Is it the CRAP protocol that Ken was just sharing? What is an idea that you might have for this final project? All right, I'll give you some time to play around with that. While you're thinking about it, you also consider what you might do. You could just maybe make a poster. That's not a problem. Maybe just use marker and texters just to be able to create a poster or artwork. Or you could make a Google site. You could make a video. You could maybe use Canva to create an infographic. You could even use this that program Book Creator that Ken referenced a few weeks ago. We'll give you some time to think about it. We'll give you some time to kick around the idea. I wanted to share with you that we will. I'll have office hours next week, so we will come back to this. Let me just bump this up a little bit bigger. There we go. We're going to come back as a group on the 6th of September, but I've also set aside next Tuesday as an optional time to come in and just chat. There'll be no presentation. It'll just be access to me to chat with me about maybe what your project could look like. This is our final project for the course. What we'd like to do is hear from you what you think is important and how you might share that with your friends, your students, your colleagues. And we'll come back. So next Tuesday at 3:30, at the same time as we met today, we're going to come. I'll just be here in a like a Google Meet. You can drop in if you'd like and just ask questions, and you don't have to stick around. It's really no set time. All right. Any questions for us before we jump out? This is, yeah, thank you. Sophie's mentioning again that is an optional time. You do not need to come to this. And then it's just it's an optional check-in time for the project that is going to be due. That project, by the way, is due on, here, I have it written here. That's right. The 30th of August. That project is due on the 30th of August. All right. Well, feel free to stick around and ask questions. That might be all that we have to share with you today. If you want to stick around and ask questions about the project, or if you have anything else you'd like to share, we're happy to do that. We want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us again for our second session with you and your students. We're so grateful to you that you're sharing in the classroom and sharing in the chat and the discussions that we're able to develop today. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Jim, for another terrific Becoming Media Savvy session. And thanks to all the participants for interacting on the chat and responding to the questions and really engaging in the topic. It's wonderful to see. Looking forward to your creations, and as Jim outlined, you've got the check-in session and the due date for your projects the end of August, and then the final showcase session on the 6th of September. Thanks everyone for your time this afternoon.
Bye everyone.